Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're wrapping up our series on before the patriarchs, and you know, last we're a little bit of continuation from last week. When last week we looked at the new beginning and what changed before the flood and what changed after, and a little bit of that carries over to today's as well. But our main focus is the response to this new beginning. This new beginning how does the descendants of Noah respond to this new beginning? In a way, God sort of wiped the slate clean, so to speak, and let them start over with some new conditions for certain. The world had changed, as we said, and we're going to see some more changes in today's lesson as well. But the main thing is, how do they respond, and who are these, and who who are what's significant about these sons of Noah, and who came from which son? We'll look at that as well. And we're going to begin here. We're going to begin here with Genesis 6, verse 2 through 5. The sons of God saw the daughters of men; they were fair, and they took them wives, all which they chose. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, but that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." There were giants in the earth in those days. After that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bare children of them, that the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. So, a couple of things that stand out right here about this one. About this is, first of all, notice that God says his spirit's not going to strive with man. He's given them up to Methuselah 969 years. They had that much time to repent. Now he's cutting it down to 120. It's kind of a normal, and roughly cutting the lifespan of man down to 1/8 of what it has been being. And another thing worth noting here is there's two conditions here that were in Noah's day, and we're look at how those were compared to afterwards. And one of them was the giants were in the land, and we see also after that. So the human race did not learn its lesson. It went back to this thing of of these B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew, this class of angels, intermarrying and producing, as we said before, these men of renown, men like men that are in these mythical demigods in Greek mythology, half man, half God. Okay, God with a little G, not we're not talking about Yahuwah, Yahweh, but sort of a counterfeit of him, of Yeshua. Okay, in that regard. So we can see right away, man did not learn his lesson. It came right after that, and we looked at that in detail. We looked at that in detail when we talked about the days of Noah. Now the other thing is, before the flood and all this stuff, is the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and the imagination of thought was only on evil continually. So we'll see how that pans out, how that compares. Did mankind learn his lesson there or not? And if not, how quickly they fall apart, maybe. Well, we're going to continue on Genesis chapter 6, verse 9 through 12. Now, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. He begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. So, we see again, before the flood, all flesh corrupted his way upon the earth, except for Noah. He's a just man, perfect in his generation. And we talk about his generations. He has none of that There's no angel blood in his ancestry. And it's been true about his siblings as well, because we're told his father had other sons and daughters who undoubtedly, didn't make it to the flood. And Noah begat these three sons, and it doesn't mean these are necessarily only three children he had. They're just only a lot, a lot. He could have had some before this, but these are the only three that had the faith to help him build the ark and get on and get in the box, as it were, because they could see the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. So, and then as we saw last week, we looked at this new beginning, and right off the bat, God clarifies that things really haven't changed that much, because the root of the problem is still the root of the problem. And that's here in Genesis 8, verses 20 through 21. We read this. Noah built an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, every clean fowl, and burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor and said in his heart, I'll not curse the ground any more for man's sake. The imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. Okay, remember the ground was cursed. Thorns and thistles will still come up, but it was exponential in the world before the flood. Today, generally, you have a land, patch of the ground that's covered completely with thorns and thistles. You burn it, you can burn it off, plow it up, and maybe you have to do some minor weeding or whatever. But a lot of times it's just taking care of it at the beginning of the season, and just a little maintenance after that. But in their case, it was they were just overrun with these things, and a constant fight to get them. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. But the problem, and he's not going to destroy the earth for the flood again, as we saw last week. But the root of the problem is still here. The imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Now, there's been some had some arguments over when the youth is, and in rabbinic Judaism, there's this ideal of the evil inclination that comes in. Children are kind of sweet and pure till they hit puberty, and the evil inclination comes into them. But it's not really true. I learned a lot working with 3-year-olds in church a long time ago. A lot about people in general, and one of the things is no one has to sit down with their children and teach them how to be evil. You have to teach them how to be good. A kid can be playing with a toy, gets bored of it, puts it to the side, goes play with another kid, and couldn't care less about that toy till another child starts playing with it. Now they covet that toy and want it. Or someone else has a toy they want. Some kids will just go over and take it from them. To teach your children, to teach young children how to steal. You have to teach them not to steal. The fact is, my sweet 3-year-old grandson has evil in his heart. It's born. We're all born that way. We got to be born. That's when we must be born again. So, the root of the problem has not changed, even though the flood wiped out all the bad people except and all that. The root of the problem is still the heart of man, and that problem is still there. Now, now we're going to start looking at Noah's sons. And here in Genesis 11, Genesis 7, verse 11 through 14, read the following. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day, all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark. And they, every beast after his kind, all the cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth after his kind, every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. So, the flood happened, but what we want to focus on here is who gets, that Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, go, they saw the evil today. Now They had enough faith to help build the ark and get the ark. And again, the word means box and get in it. So they're there and they're in the ark. And of course they get out later in Genesis 9, 8 through 9, verses 8 through 9. We read this about his three sons again. And God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. Okay. Notice that Noah's sons didn't just hear God this time. His sons heard it as well. And it kind of harkens forward, as it were, to Sinai when the Ten Commandments are given and the entire camp hears the voice of God. So, they know this, that Dad just didn't get lucky with the flood business, or whatever, something. They know that they hear God's voice himself, and this covenants with them as well. And we read this more about them here in Genesis 9, 16 through 18. And the rainbow and the bow shall be in the cloud, and I'll look upon it. I will remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature is all flesh of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I've established between me and all flesh is upon the earth. And the sons of Noah which went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. Okay, so again, notice the order is the same as we've been seeing: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we'll see that this is not in according to their age at all, but rather their importance to the narrative of the Bible as a whole. And I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. But notice how that Ham has other children. We'll see later who got named, but notice how Canaan's he's singled out as the father of Canaan. So there's that connection between Ham and Canaan. And their names are interesting. I'll give it to you now. We'll maybe expound upon them a little later. But Shem literally means name. Yes, Noah named his son name. And that's because Shem, is associated with Hashem, as we'll say about the name, Yahuwah, Yahweh, however you pronounce the tetragrammaton or attempt to pronounce it. We don't actually know. The Lord God, associated with that, in the spiritual aspect. Ham means hot, and it's like the body. Okay, more the physical aspect of man. And we'll even use expressions like that. Such and such, such and such woman looks hot, or whatever the case is. Because the male of the species internal temperature will actually sometimes really go up. Okay, except so, causes him to feel hot, as it were. So, except and then Japheth, and Japheth is all about the soul. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but it means enlargement, and there's a lot to that, and we'll explain that later. But notice that Canaan, Canaan here is being singled out as his son really early. Some of these others, we talk about some of their descendants, but he gets mentioned really early, and here's why. We'll see why here in a minute. In Genesis 5:32, we read the following: Noah was 500 years, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So he's 500 years old, and we'll see he didn't begin. They weren't triplets. We'll make that'll become clear when we get in the text a little bit later. But this is when the first one of the three was born. Okay, and they're not in age order, as we shall see. All right, so, but these are these three sons. Now, in Genesis 9, verse 19 through 23, we kind of pick up where we left off last time. And here's what we read: And these three sons of Noah, of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and was drunk, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders. and went backwards and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were and, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. Okay, so here's the first thing we know about the three sons of Noah. A whole earth was overspread of these three. Everyone on earth is a descendant of one of these three sons of Noah. We're all descendants of Noah, and of Noah and Mrs. Noah, of course. And we're all descendants of one of these sons and their wife. So, so that's first thing notice. Noah has this incident here. And notice that, and we'll see in a moment here, this, as you're reading, it might give the appearance it's right after the, right away after the ark, and he got out and started being a husband means farmer, and planted a vineyard and got drunk right away. But we'll see in the moment here why Canaan keeps getting mentioned and how that's not the case. It's actually a lot later. But and Noah's called righteous, as we saw. And this is totally out of his character. And it's probably he wasn't a classic drunk or alcoholic. But for whatever reason, he drank too much wine, and it and we talked about so how he must have felt, and just imagine if he had children besides these that just wouldn't get on the ark with him, and perhaps the sound of pounding on the ark. He may have had it's possible he had nightmares at night and stuff, and wanted to drink drink a little wine to help him clear his head and whatever. Well, he just kept at it too long, got drunk. He's uncovered. So he was laying there, perhaps laying there, whatever reason, not covered up, and laying in his tent. Maybe it was hot, and he just went in there. But anyway, he got drunk, and now this all the nakedness here, has an implication. Now, first of all, it's about Ham sees the nakedness. But there's kind of a double meaning to that, possibly. I believe it's Leviticus 8:18, where it says if a man sleeps with if a man sleeps with his father's wife, he's uncovered his father's nakedness. If he has sexual activity, and similar expressions used, of other things as well. And so there's this implication that maybe for Ham, it might mean he just saw him and told his brothers it out, and perhaps he was disrespectful about it. He told him. We don't know. We do know it's more than just, he opened the tent and went, whoops, perhaps he was trying to entice the other two to come look at his neck and this stuff. We'll see why I say that in a moment. But notice that they make sure that Shem, notice Shem's again first, and then Japheth, have a different response, and they're out there trying to not shame their father. And again, perhaps Ham was shaming him, like, hey, come on, take a look at Dad. He's drunk and naked. Well, now as we continue on, we're gonna get a little more insight why Canaan keeps getting mentioned. And we see this in Genesis. We're going to see this in our passage here in Genesis 9, and we continue on Genesis 9, verse 24 through 29. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his son had done to him, and said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be a servant. And God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be a servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. And I'll probably show this again and bring this up again when we get our series on the patriarchs. But you chart all this out, you find out Noah lived till Abraham was like 52, 58 years old, something like that. Okay, we'll see why, and when we get to that point, But so Noah lives 350 years after the flood, and so remember the flood starts when he's 600. So this point here, Ham has already had a son, who's already grown enough to do this wicked thing to Noah. Notice how it's Canaan who's cursed. It's not Ham, it's Canaan. And notice how Ham's the younger son. Ham's the youngest. You got mentioned earlier first because of the story, because of what happened. But Ham's the youngest. And in Canaan, particularly, his son gets singled out. And Canaan, by the way, is not even his oldest son. So we know this a number of years after the flood occurred. Perhaps, at least 30, but probably maybe 50, 60 years later. Okay. Somewhere in that area. So they're still all together at this point. And notice how Noah here really frames all of history. Now, I'm saying this about being about this being applied to the servants of Ham, and for that reason justifying enslaving Africans, except. Now, there is some truth to the fact this came down on Africans to some degree. But the fact is, when it comes to slavery, you go back to any ethnic group and go back far enough, and virtually anyone on earth, and you'll find that ancestors that were slaves. I mean, take the Jews for the Israelis today, the Jews. Back in Egypt, their entire ethnic group was slaves once upon a time, right? So slavery is not limited to that by any means. I mean, with Africans, it's definitely true that they were. Well, I'll explain here. That God will enlarge Japheth, and Japheth's territory did indeed get enlarged through colonization, particularly. And where did he colonize? Mostly, he dwelt in the Thames as Shem, and and that would include. We'll see this later, but that's North and South America and Australia in particular, and and perhaps some other places as well. But especially some of the Polynesian islands, except and especially those three continents, and they're the dwelling place of the descendants of Shem. Some of Shem's descendants. And Canaan is going to be the servant. Is going to be the servant of Japheth as well as Shem. And now back to the other descendants of Ham, because Canaan is not. They're not descendants of Canaan. The Africans who were brought over as slaves into America. And by the way, there were slaves of Indians, Native Americans first, but they made a law saying you couldn't buy slaves from. And what typically happened was two tribes went to war, and the loser tribe ended up being slaves of the winning tribe. Not unlike what you see with David, with the Philistines. If your champion kills our champion, we'll be your slaves. If our champion kills your champion, you'll be our slaves. So again, this is a very typical arrangement all over the world. Well, in this particular case, they bought slaves from Africa. They were already slaves in Africa, but almost entirely. Shipped them across there. And Native Americans, particularly the so-called five civilized tribes, but like the Creek and the Cherokee, except bought them as well. And the Shem, and they were descendants of Shem. And then of course the European colonists came over. They again are living in the land of Shem, but which include the Native Americans. And again, Africans were indeed their slaves. But that's not what this is talking about here. Notice this is about Canaan. And notice he's a servant of servants. He's a slave of slaves he's going to be to his brothers. Canaan's the one who Ham may have looked on his father's nakedness, perhaps said something embarrassing, whatever. But notice how this punishment falls on the son Canaan, who of course gets mentioned multiple times. Canaan may have went further and somehow molested Noah, or something of that effect. So And we'll talk about Canaan some more in a future lesson, in those regards. But there's, good reason to think that, to see that's the case. So you got this general pattern, though. This general pattern, though. This general pattern, and of course, this idea of slaves, even there in America, sometimes you'd have sometimes they particularly in a large plantation, he might have a lot of them, and he may put one guy in charge of a bunch of other slaves. He's still a slave to the master, but the other guys are basically slaves to him. And in some cases, they even broke off and they even got their own freedom somehow and bought their own slaves and became black masters, as they were called, particularly in the New Orleans area. So, there's all kinds of, ugly things in American history people don't want to talk about, but, nonetheless, they happened. And this kind of frames history, all of history, particularly this colonization of the descendants of Japheth, and we'll talk about who those are in a little bit. Now, in Genesis 1:10-1, we read the following. Now, these are the generations, the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Unto them were sons born after the flood. Okay, notice they had any sons before the flood. After the flood, their sons will be born. We're talking about who they are. And these are now we're getting into the descendants of Noah at a deeper level. I mean, so far, things have already gone south. Ham was on the boat, was on the ark. I mean, he was in the world before, saw how wicked it was. He was in the ark. He got saved, he got saved from that wick. He got saved from the destruction of the ark. Came out of the ark. He'd heard the covenant with God. Was told about the rainbow. Could see that, and yet he still does. He still does something bad. And his son, who he told about, undoubtedly told these things, who did something really bad. Okay, so all the sons are born after the flood. Now we're gonna talk about these. And again, notice the order is Shem, Ham, and Japheth again. And we're going to start here with these sons of Japheth. And we know we know through study who all these are, and I'll probably just tell you all of them. Remember, Japheth means enlargement. Gomer, we'll talk about him later because he's expanded upon, and we'll talk about Javan later. But let's just read it first. In Genesis 10, verse 2-5. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, and Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elishah, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. These were the isles of these were the isles of the Gentiles divided into their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. Okay. So now let's talk about these. Magog is basically Kazakhstan, and perhaps in some of the other countries around there today, but the Kazakhs came from Magog. Madai's the Medes, and it's the northern part of Iran today. Iran's another name for is one of the tribes of the descendants of the Medes. And the country was called Persia in 1937, and the Russians helped the Iranians come in there and take over, basically. So they renamed it after them. And it's their story, but there's always been that partnership, kind of partnership between the Persians and the Medes, and this, trying to get the upper hand on each other all the time inside that partnership. So now it's basically the area of Iran today, the northern half of Iran. It will also include Afghanistan, perhaps as well. Okay. Tubal, modern Russia is the largest country in Europe and the largest country in Asia. The part that's in Asia was called Siberia before, I believe it was Peter the Great. it may have been Grotsky, also known as Ivan the Terrible, conquered Siberia and made it all one, basically made it all one country. And the capital before he took it over was called Tobolsk. And it's named after Tubal. It was on the Tobol River. Again, the same phonetics as Tubal. So there's no doubt that Russia, Russia and the people who live in Russia in Asia, again, it's the largest country in Asia. Just the part of Russia that's in there is larger than China, the land area of China. So we're talking about Siberia here, that Asian part of Russia today, and perhaps a little spill over to some border areas, into some border areas as well, into China, except perhaps. Meshek. Now, Meshek is who Moscow is named after, and you'll often see Tubal and Meshek put together. So Meshek Meshek is Russia, that's parts in Europe, and also some of the related people like in Ukraine, except Belarus, except who are also there. I mean, Russia itself is named after Swedes who took it over, the Rus. But but in more ancient times it wasn't called that. It wasn't called Russia at all. But nonetheless, the capital of Moscow today is named after Meshek. Now let's get this down the Gomer. Now Gomer has these three sons. Now there's Ashkenaz, as in Ashkenazi Jews, and this is the progenitor of the Germans and everyone related to them. The Galatians. Gala means milk white. Galatians was milk white skin, literally. Is what that meant. And perhaps the milk was more like a little goat milk or a little not, quite tissue white, but still very white skin. And the Ripon Mountains were told as where Ripoth lived, according to Josephus. And what we're talking about is the people of like Hungary, Hungary, Buda, those kind of Eastern Europe. Not quite up, and maybe there's some breakage there. Maybe someone from, south of Ukraine, but north of Greece, that whole area along in there, generally speaking, and perhaps some a little bit into Russia and Georgia, into Asia, perhaps, generally it's going to be on the European side of the Caucasus Mountains in the Ural River. But they're in that area down there, okay? So, if you think of the old Soviet Union, the southern part of the old Soviet Union who we're talking about here, and also the people of Finland. They're genetically different than the people of Sweden and Norway. They have a different history, and DNA has, proven this out. Now, Togarmah is the progenitor of the Turks, and the Turks know this, and they've made record of it, and they're kind of proud of it. The word Turk's not really Turk means strong one, okay? In ancient days they started calling themselves the strong ones later. They were the Togarmahi, back in the day, Togarmahi, and the Togarmahi were and the oldest Turkish writing in the world is right there in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia today, right in the center of Mongolia. Because of that great wall the Chinese built was to keep out not the Mongols, who they called the Zhuave back in the day, but to keep out the Xiongnu, the Turks. How they, in the days of Messiah, there were no Turks to speak of in Turkey, in the days of the apostles. Turkey literally means belonging to the Turks. Well, so the Mongols called the Turks by the name for them in Mongolian is Hanu. It's where we get the word Hun from. And what happens? The Chinese invaded Manchuria to take it over, which is that area of the day between North Korea and Mongolia, that area there. And the Mongols moved west and invaded the land of the Zhuave, who weren't expecting an attack from that direction. and and they went, they went west all the way over to, well, all the way over to France. I mean, the Romans had to go deal with them until the Hun and this kind of thing, right? And they ended up being settled in what's Turkey today, along with all those areas like Turkmenistan. All it's called Greater Turkey. So you can imagine the strip of Asia going east to west. You got one of Russia, you got one of Siberia, right below that one, and then you got Kazakhstan over in this one corner, perhaps going across, and below that is one Magog. And below that is this one that goes all the way over to Turkey from, again, the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are descendants of the Togomar too, if I remember correctly, which is in China, going all the way over going over there. Okay, so you kind of got an ideal. You pretty much have the northern half of Europe covered, the northern half of Asia, I'm sorry, covered, and all of Europe covered by these people, except for we have not talked about southern Europe and the area around the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea, which is where we're at now. Elisha is the Greeks. In Greek mythology, if the gods were pleased when you died, you went to the Elysian fields, literally the fields of Elisha. If you've seen Elysian fields, people down in Texas say that's a city down there. That's what it's a reference to. Okay, this idea was common. People got where they worship their fathers, and we'll talk about why later. Worship these early fathers, and imagine they go with them. Now, Tarshish is the Spaniards and the Portuguese today, and they lived in the Iberian Peninsula. Oh, I got mentioned. I'm sorry, I got mentioned about Elisha. Not just Greece today, but they colonized the entire coast of the Black Sea, the entire southern coast of Europe along the Mediterranean Sea, the entire coast of Africa along the Mediterranean Sea, and also when you're talking about Turkey, at least down to that southwest corner, and probably all the way over to what's Syria today. So Greeks, don't think of the Greeks' territory, as it were, as being restricted to the country of Greece today. Matter of fact, even like in Sicily, genetics have shown that they're primarily Greek ancestry. In Roman time, when Paul went to Rome in Roman times, 70% of Rome still spoke Greek, not Latin, because they've been brought in because of their education, etc. Latin was you see this very so you kind of get the ideal. It's not just, again, don't limit your mind to Greece. Limit to mainly Greece plus all this coastal area we just talked about. These are these isles they divided among their lands. Well, these isles are also, we got Tarshish, he's over in Iberia, which is a little east of the Black Sea in that area. Well, later they got moved out to the Iberian Peninsula, named after where they left. And today they're Spain and Portugal. But they've also, again, that colonization we talked about earlier, they went to as well, South America. Every country south of the U.S. border is basically ruled by these descendants of Tarshish. The Philippines was once upon a time, before the Americans came along, got in the Spanish-American War. But everything that's not a U.S. territory or whatever in the New World or part of or Canada is ruled by these descendants of Tarshish, even though they're not the majority. But these descendants of Ashkenaz, which would include England, by the way, the British Isles, through one son of Ashkenaz, we know from history, came the British. From a different son came the Celts. Okay, they're genetically related. Related. In fact, sometimes they did. You go on and the DNA, a big DNA sampling across the British Isles, and found the Irish really weren't that much different in a lot of ways. There's Irish markers 1, 2, and 3, but there is a little difference. But sometimes So sometimes there wasn't much, but it's very minor. It's not like the differences were kind of minor, relatively speaking, and and they're definitely related to the to the Brits at the root. This came in a different immigration period, a different wave of immigration by a different route. But but when you talk about the English, I mean, we're talking about colonized, the U.S. and the Canada. They colonized those and made way for Germans was in colonial America. German was the second largest ethnic group after English, and so basically, and then in Australia they pretty much took it over, but they became the majority. They became the majority over all these countries, and they also colonized some that were these countries that were descendants of Japheth. They have Shem. I'm sorry. They also had some colonization to a lesser extent in Africa, and some of these descendants of Ham we'll talk about. So, sort of give you an idea who the players here are. So Tarshish, of course. Now this brings us to Katim. Katim is the Italians, and of course, we know the Roman Empire and how they expanded. It's funny that the Welsh in their later written down, but oral history kind of done poetically. They referred to the Romans as dwarfs from the east because they were so much smaller than the British Celts. They pretty much lived in pretty much the people of Wales today, but they still, nonetheless, could not beat them. And so these guys, of course, colonized and built the Roman Empire. Again, half their empire was in the east, in the land of Shem primarily, although somewhat in Africa, somewhat in the land of Africa. I mean, somewhat in the land of Africa as well. Okay, but a good part of it was in the tents of Shem, as it were. That brings us to Dodanine, and Dodanine means leaders, and this is who the Cretans came from. I used to live in Greece, and the Cretan is a different culture altogether, a different ethnic group. And the Greek Isles really weren't settled by Greeks; they were settled by these descendants of Dodanine, the Cretans. And the Cretans, of course, are who their capital was Phoenicia on the western tip of Crete, and they sailed to what's Lebanon today. Started a colony there, and in their tradition, named after the place they left, became the Phoenicians. And they were the first to invent writing. Not only did they invent the alphabet, it started off very primitive looking, but they had two systems of writing before. It looked like squiggly lines. Cretan 1 and 2 would never been. As far as I know, they've never have been able to decipher them. But they were definitely writing, and they definitely, someone trained them definitely understood them. Understood what looks like, again, like squiggly lines. They invented sailing. Well, that's pretty handy if you're going to live on islands. The ark was, again, just built a box. Purpose in life is not to sink. Well, they improved on that. Put a rudder on it and a keel, and a sail so it have some power. And and so they spread out across all these Mediterranean isles in particular. So basically, initially, what we're talking about is the sons of Japheth covered basically the northern half of Europe, more or less. I mean, of Asia, all of Europe, and then through colonization then later went to the tents of Shem and became the majority ethnic group in the U.S. and Canada, and came to rule over, in Australia as well, I should say, and came to rule over all the ethnic groups, all the countries south of the U.S. border in North and South America, and also set up some colonies, and indeed the ruling class were for many years in South Africa under apartheid. and even other countries in Africa. So this is who the sons of Japheth are. Indeed, they enlarged. And remember, they're about to sow enlargement of the mind. And Japheth, basically virtually all your math, science, history, uh, your poetry, your arts. I'm not saying all music, but I am saying, you think of your great artists like Leonardo da Vinci, etc. Basically all those kind of things that have to do with the soul primarily have come to the sons of Japheth. That doesn't mean no one else can do it either. It doesn't mean the sons of Japheth all stink at, the things of the body like athleticism. They don't have any, but it's not, not where they disproportionately excel at. This is where they disproportionately excel at compared to everyone else. There's one last thing we need to know about Japheth, and that's in Genesis 10, 11 to 21. And Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. Okay, so notice that Japheth's the elder. So Japheth's the oldest son, but he keeps getting mentioned last, except here in his genealogies that we're mentioning him first. But why? Because now we're doing a reverse. There's a reverse order of importance. Okay, and that's why it was mentioned last before. It was a forward order of importance. Now it's a reverse one. We're just kind of clearing out the least important people first, then moving on to the more important people. And you can think of these sons of Noah as three parts of a great play that's gone across all of history. And in the perspective of the Bible, and the main characters come through Shem, the heroes, the main antagonists. We mentioned Canaan earlier. Come through Ham, particularly Canaan. And Japheth's largely on the sideline, largely on the sideline until the time of the Persians, the Medes and the Persians. So that's why, even though he's the oldest, he's not getting, when they're just talking about the importance, they have him last, and when they're going from least important to most, they're just just tell us so we know where his descendants went, we know who they are, but that's all we really care about at that point. It's not just they're kind of the supporting cast in this play, and the struggles between Shem and Ham for the most part, as we shall see. Now we continue on in Genesis 10, 6 through 7, and we read about Ham, or basically they by and large the antagonist, at least the father of the antagonist, which is primarily Canaan, and we shall see. The sons of Ham, again, Genesis 10, verse 6 through 7. The sons of Ham, Cush, Mitzrayim, Hut, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, Sabteka. The sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Okay, so now, first of all, again, Ham means hot. It has to do with the body, right? And everywhere his descendants settled is hot. And Cush means black, literally. The Greek word's Ethiopia. Cush the Ethiopian, and sometimes he's referred to, but it's literally translated into Ethiopia, which means sun scorched. And these are down in sub-Saharan Africa. We'll talk about them in a minute, a little bit more. Mitzrayim is Egypt. And on the continent of Africa, it's up there in the northeast corner of the continent of Africa. In classical Egypt, from the navigable part of the Nile, from the cataracts, instead of cascading waterfalls that you couldn't go with a boat. From there all the way down, to the Nile Delta, all the way out to the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta. Sorry, the Nile Delta. They would use reed boats and that kind of thing with it. Fut is North Africa, particularly north of Sahara Desert, and perhaps even even a little bit south on the Sahel, that strip of semi-desert that runs along the southern edge, that separates the southern edge of the Sahara from the more fertile part of Africa south of that, more green part. And, and it's Libya. We're talking Libya, Morocco, those kind of areas. And again, remember, there's going to be some intermarrying here, because the Greeks have colonized the whole coast. So, but nonetheless, that's kind of gives you an idea. And so we're talking about the continent of Africa between those three, plus the land of Canaan, which is on the rest of what in geology is referred to as the Afro-Asian plate. Geologically, Israel and Jordan and some of these places like that are actually not geographically they're part of Asia. Geologically, though, they're actually part of Africa. And indeed, the Nahel Tenin in along the coast of which means the Crocodile River. The city there was called Crocodilopolis by the Greeks. They used to be on it. Missionary, the last crocodile was seen in 1912. The missionaries went there in 1870, so there were hippos there as well. And in the day in southern Israel, there's hyenas and some of these other type African animals. In historic times, there were rhinoceros, etc. So there's some of the wildlife as well. There's this connection to Africa. But the thing is, this whole area is hot, like his name means. And now these sons of Cush, notice them. And we're going to talk about, so they're all living there, sub-Saharan Africa. And Rama, creates two ethnic groups. These are all starters of ethnic groups. Doesn't mean these are the only children these people had. They're just listing the ones that started, the ethnic groups, formed around, like they did with Cain before the flood. And so there's Sheba and Dedan, and Sheba is worth bearing out because there's two Shebas. One's the descendant of Shem, we'll talk about later, and that one's settling what's Yemen today. And if you're going south from Jerusalem, you kind of hit the Red Sea, and then you have to fork to the you either got to fork left or right. And if you fork down towards the Arabian Peninsula, as far south you can go is Yemen. But if you fork the other direction, as far south you can go is Sheba. And it's literally the ends of the earth, in ancient times. And this is where the Queen of Sheba probably came from. It came from a great distance. Yemen's a distance, but but relatively speaking, it's not a great distance. So we're talking about South Africa is Sheba. That area down there is Sheba, and so on and so forth. In this and of course now one of the Malawi Empire in the center of Africa came from one of these sets. So So you got an idea about these, but there's another important thing about Ham. We're about to see here through Cush in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 10. We read the following: Cush begat Nimrod, and he begat to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. It said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Okay, the land of Shinar is southern Iraq today. So we're talking about, this is it's the land of Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and there's some confluence between them. And they made canals. And he starts this there. He's there. And notice he's become a mighty one in the earth. So Nimrod, this, in other words, he's not like those people we talked about before. He's not a Nephilim. His father's Cush, not an angel. But but now he's become the leader, and he's sort of after this new beginning, the new Cain. And this where it says before the Lord is literally in his face, in the face of the Lord. And it's not just he hunted animals, except, which things we know from Gilgamesh and stuff, he certainly did. But the main thing is he hunted the souls of men. He hunted them to bring them in rebellion against the Lord. In the face of the Lord, we're gonna get off the God standard, just like they did with Cain and his descendants. And notice again, just like Cain was a son of Adam, so now Cush, the grandson of Ham. The rebellion perhaps took a little longer, but here it is nonetheless. That same rebellion we saw before with Cain. And we'll get back to him in a minute. We're gonna wrap up with the other descendants of Ham, because Cush, this thing Nimrod did. There's more to the story, and we'll see that. In Genesis 10, 13 through 20, read the following. Mitzrayim begat Ludim and Ananim and Levi and Lahabim and Nephathim and Parushim and Casalim, out of whom came Philistine, and Caphtorim. And Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgasite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite, and the Zimrite, and the Hamathite. Afterwards, the families of Canaanites spread abroad. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go towards Gerar, unto Gaza. As you go into Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abda, and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. And these are the sons of Ham, their families, after their tongues, and their countries, and in their nations. Okay, Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim is again the word for Egypt. But in that area around there, he creates, he has some other groups that form out, perhaps some, desert dwellers or whatever. Camptorim was on what the misnamed Sinai Peninsula today, about halfway between. You got the two tongues of the Red Sea, and you kind of draw an imaginary line up to the coast. About halfway between those, on the Mediterranean coast, is where Camptor was. And notice the Philistines are picked out here. Now remember, this is a son of Ham. These are his grandchildren, and some descendant, later descendant of this one is picked out. And this is the Philistines. But notice Canaan. This is the list of troublemakers, as it was, that Israel's going to have to deal with in the future. Sidon, like Tyrian Sidon, okay? Heth, the word literally means terror. Since they're called Hittites, terrorists. They're literally the original terrorists. Jebusites, those who occupied Jerusalem in that area. The Amorite, those who lived, remember they lived on the east side of Jordan. The Girgasite, the Hivite, the Archite, the Sinite. These are these families, and they're in that area again of the Afro-Asian plate that's in Asia. And notice there's something very different here about these Canaanites. It's the first time we're told here in the text where anyone lives. Okay. And and pretty much gives you the borders of it. From Sidon, as you come to Gerar. Gerar is on the border of Egypt. Gerar. Sidon's up there in Lebanon. You're gonna go through Gaza. Then so you got a line there, and you're gonna go east from that line. That line's all along the Mediterranean coast, more or less. And you're gonna go east from that line, all the way over to eastern Jordan, and might include part of Saudi Arabia today. and basically over to the border of Iraq, pretty much, pretty close. Okay, perhaps even to the Euphrates, perhaps even over to the Euphrates River, because that is, the boundary that's given it's given to Abraham later. So you kind of, that's kind of their area. And notice that these are the inhabitants of this area, besides the giants we talked about before. So, and these are these for a long period of time are the main opponents to the descendants of Israel who came from Shem. So so they get this, and they started off bad with Canaan, with the whole Noah incident, and they just get worse, as we can see. Now, in Genesis 9, verse 1 through 2, we read the following. We're going to find a problem. As I mentioned, Nimrod creates a problem here. He's in the Lord's face. Now we're going to drill in that problem a little bit more. So again, in Genesis 9, verse 1 through 2, God blessed Noah and his sons, said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread shall be upon every beast of the earth, upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moves upon the earth, all the fish of the seas, and in your hands they are delivered. We talked about this last time, how the prime directive to man to be fruitful in carrying out the purpose of God, multiplying and refilling the earth, was given to Noah and his sons. Those his sons heard this. It's like they heard that covenant. They know that this is what they've been directed to do. But Nimrod starts Babel, remember, this first city, and now there's a problem, as we're going to see. In Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 through 4, read the following. The whole earth was of one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, go to, let's make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. And they said, go to, let's build a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven. Let's make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Hey, there's a lot here. Well, it would seem to follow that the whole earth is one language and one speech. I mean, Noah and his sons, of course, have to talk to each other. But there'd only been one language and one speech up to this point. Okay, still was. Now, but that can be handy for good, but they didn't use it for good, they used it for evil. And so Noah, and his sons, they started in Arafat, which is kind of the center of all the area described, with to the south of them, the sense of Ham, to the east of that, pretty much where Arafat is, you just kind of goes east and down, draw a straight line and kind of down. Our descendants of Shem, we'll talk about that more in a minute. In north, north and west is the descendants of Japheth. Or supposed to be. That's where they ended up. But they are not following along with the plan at all. Remember, before the Lord, in his face, literally. Okay. The instructions were going to all there, and this could it could have went very slowly over a long period of time, where again, Noah's sons, maybe Japheth moved with his sons to the north, and so on and so forth, and in the next generation move a little further out, and got there eventually. But they aren't going to do it. They say, we don't want to be scattered on the face of the earth. And the pride, let us make us a name. You remember, just like the serpent had said to Eve, you'll be wise like the gods, the appeal to their pride, the city and a tower. And that tower, notices, reach up to heaven, but the more literal, it would say to observe the heavens. I mean, you may have seen these little spiral things, and maybe eventually, they would have found out the air was too thin to be up there anyways, and too cold. But it took a millennium to build it literally up to the top of the Earth's atmosphere or something. They kept expounding that little spiral that was on the outside, right? But it's more literally to observe the heavens. because that's now the new religion. Remember, off the God standard, just like Cain had done before, him with his vegan religion. Well, now they've got one where they want to observe the heavens. They want to be able to see the stars, the sun, the moon. And again, we're told things like the like the writings about Gilgamesh and stuff, that they had basically a zodiac on top of this tower, for their new religion. So this again in the face of God, led by Nimrod. But God's not to be outdone here, as we shall see in Genesis chapter 11, verses 5 through 9. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people is as one, they have one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will restrain for them which they've imagined to do. Let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there upon all the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore, the name was called Babel, or Babel, is where we get our word Babel from. And the Lord there did confound the language of all the earth. And from there did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now, so now what they had to do is they had to clump up by language group. They couldn't work together anymore. They had to find people who could speak with them and form groups. Groups didn't get along with each other. And they fought with each other. So they, end up getting scattered. So in the end, his will was done. In the day, indeed, the human race is the descendants of Noah, the human race is scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And we don't speak. And they'll say, well, this thing about having only one language is a little far fetched or whatever. But linguists have found, through intensive study of just a multitude of languages, and notice that there's all these patterns that are common between them, where maybe they're literally mixed up. The word confound here means mixed up. We're like the double M pattern for mama when you ignore the vowels, like Emma, mama, except. But they're and sometimes see language very similar, except they're like maybe the vowel and the vowel and verb orders in different order, or the letters when you write them in transliterate them into Latin characters, they have the same letters, but again a different order for the same for words. So they make different words that mean the same thing, but they're pronounced in a different order. The monophones, the syllables, are pronounced in a different order, and this kind of thing. So it's like it was literally stirred up, as it were. And and again, if something, I've said this before, if something's true, it'll bear up to close scrutiny. And again, this claim of the Bible that there really was only one language and it fragmented, except bears up to close scrutiny. The Bible also just gives us a little more information about how it did this and why. God himself did it, so his will be accomplished in them going out to all the earth, because they were in his face. But this new religion's already started, and we'll talk about that towards the end. Because they're back off the God center, just like they had done before the flood, Cain. Now we're going to clarify a moment, a little bit of misconception here, because there's this association with Nimrod and another guy named Asher, and we want to clarify. First we're going to look at why there's the confusion, then we'll clarify how things really are. We begin here in Genesis 10 verses 9 through 12. And he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher, and built Nineveh, and the city of Rehoboth, and Calah, and risen between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city. Asher is who another problem people for the for the people of Israel later, the Assyrians come from. Okay, and you know, and what do we see here about, you know, and what do we see here about Asher? Is people say, well, look, he came out of the land of Shinar, he must have been related to Nimrod. But no, we just saw everyone came out of the land of Shinar. Remember, the land of Shinar is where Nimrod built Babel, and where this tower was being built, and where this confusion occurred. Okay, so he left. He just left the land of Shinar, southern Iraq, just like everyone else, and he didn't go very far. This area of Nineveh is primarily northern Iraq today. So he went up the Euphrates. Nineveh sits on the Euphrates, and he built himself a northern kingdom as opposed to the Babylonian kingdom in the south. He built a northern one. So now we're gonna now we shift and focus on the primary people, the sons of Shem. The people that the Bible spends most of its time talking about, particularly a particular group from Shem, which we'll discuss. And here it is, and by and large, often more favorably spoken of than those of Ham as a general rule. And here's what we read in Genesis 10:22 through 25. The children of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The children of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. And unto Eber were born two sons, and the name of one was Peleg, for in his day the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Okay, we're going to begin at the bottom statement there, so it's fresh in your mind. So remember the sequence of events. You got on the ark. The sons of Noah heard God's commandment to scatter across to fill the earth. They went east somewhere, and they came back, and they came from that direction and got and perhaps looking for a really suitable place, found the land of Shinar. Nimrod rose up against the Lord in his face, started this false religion, and so they wouldn't be scattered. God broke it up with their languages, but now, after he scatters them across, remember, there's only one piece of land, the land, Peleg. But in the days of Peleg, from the birth of Peleg till his death, the earth was divided. And we'll look at how long he lived in a few minutes, but needless to say, it really, really there was at the worst case is moving maybe 10 inches a day or something. I mean, like that. If you're on the shores, it's 20. A week later, 3 days later, it's a yard. 3 days later, it's 2 yards to the opposite shore. I mean, it was actually a fairly slow process, but nonetheless, it kept people from being able to reunite again. And his brother's name's Joktan, and there's a reason why his brother's mentioned, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about these other children of Shem. Remember, Shem means name. And his oldest one is Elam. Elam is who the Persians came from. And the historical border of Persia was the Indus River, which cuts Pakistan today in half, which is an artificial construct of the British. And they cover, Elam's territory was southern Iran, and mostly Pakistan on the west side of the Indus River. Arphaxad, well, he's mainly a connection to Eber, and Eber comes to these other people. But Lud ends up, the Ludites end up over what's Turkey today. It's who Lydia was named after. That's where they end up eventually. Aram's where the Armenians came from, Armenia. But also, some of these other groups. And in particular, I want to mention particular Ul. The Uli are the Mongolians. Okay. They're the Mongolians today. So you kind of got this, as it were, with these. You kind of got this ideal, this next band across Asia going east to west, south of the last one we talked about, with these descendants of Aram from Armenia over to Mongolia in the part of China, and perhaps including what's part of China, the Western territories, as China calls it, as well. Who ethnically are not Chinese, and the Chinese make sure they know that they're ethnically not part of Chinese. I'll put it that way. They don't let them forget. Now we'll get to Eber in a minute, but Eber, and Eber, by the way, is where the word Hebrew comes from. Across, okay, it's a Ivri. It's same word here, okay. So, but let's go talk about Joktan, then we'll get back to Peleg in a minute. But here's what we know about Joktan. This important information gives us a great idea. In Genesis 10, verses 26 to 32, read the following. And Joktan begat Almadad, and Sheleph, and Hazarmaveth, and Jira, and Hadaram, and Uzal, and Dikla, and Opal, and Obal, and Abimiel, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. Of these are the sons of Joktan. Their dwelling was from Mesha as you go into Saphar, a mountain to the east. And these are the sons of Shem after their fathers, their tongues, their lands, and their nations. And these families are the sons of Noah, their generations. These are the families of the sons of Noah after generations and their nations. And by these nations were divided the earth after the flood. Remember, the word nation means ethnic group. Okay. And you've kept count, there's 70, by the way. There you see the number 70 reference in the Bible has something to do with the Gentiles, the Goy, all right, which just means nations, ethnos in Greek. So we're going to talk about a few of these. All right, so Sheba, first of all, Saphar, their dwellings from Mesha, and Mesha were told, basically the area around Kabul today, and Shafar is this mountain out in that area, and get some of these people, and some of them actually went south from there, then kind of hooked around. So we mentioned before, Havilah is Kuwait today, and Havilah is Kuwait. Sheba, as I mentioned earlier, is Yemen. The Yemenites came from them. But most of them most of them covered, we've talked about these little bands going east to west across Asia. Well, most of them, the rest of them went east there and covered those whole areas. And some of them went north too. And, in particularly about going north then east is Almadad. And people said, well, where did Native Americans come from? Almadad literally means beyond what's known. And indeed, we know you go straight north, this mountain. It means counting. So they're beyond counting to the east. And indeed, one half of the world's population lives in basically 1/4 or so of Asia. They're essentially include the Japanese. In Tokyo, the largest city in the world, also the most densely populated city in the world. So so that's what we're talking about here. They're covering, that quarter or so of Asia. Basically east of the Euphrates River, over, over just everything over that way, and also the Isles of Polynesia, except. But Almadad is different. Almadad means beyond what's known. And indeed, the New World was called the New World because people didn't know it was there. And the lure was beyond what's known. And DNA has proven this, that there's basically two major, really, there were several immigrations, but the two main ones are the Amerindians and Mesoameridians, the northern and southern Native Americans. With the Mexico border being roughly the boundary between the two, there's a little spillover along the Mexican border area between the Aztecs of Aztec ancestry and say Apache, but not much. And what they found, what they have about all these groups is the Native Americans have the Q Hepla group, and it was thought to be the only ones for a long time. Well, as they've gotten to some more remote areas, they found it's not true. Directly north of Shafar is the Altai Mountains, and there's an ethnic group, and they also live in teepees and traditionally and stuff like that. Also, by the way, in the middle of Asia, it's kind of right there, just west of Mongolia, kind of right there near where Mongolia and Kazakhstan, all those things kind of meet. Okay, Western China, the tip of Western, I shouldn't say Mongolia, Western China, and right in that area there, the Altai Mountains, and these little pockets of ethnic groups they found like breadcrumbs going across Asia all the way over into Siberia, and then in Alaska, everyone, virtually everyone has this native people have this QFLOP. So it's like a little breadcrumb trail showing that they really did migrate from these Altai Mountains. And you may have heard this nonsense about Beringia. The fact is, there's never been any evidence of Beringia. It's a construct completely made up. They found all these fossils drilling for oil out in the Bering Sea. And they found whale fossils and walrus fossils and except like that. What they haven't found, fossils of bears, horses. I mean, the claim was the horse was in America first and got brought over, which is totally not, totally also another work of fiction. But there's no, the fact is they never found any physical evidence that this land of Beringia ever existed. It wasn't needed. People have actually walked, it's frozen over, and people have actually walked from Siberia over to Alaska before. There's two islands in there, the Diomedes. You can walk or kayak to one. People have actually swam it. People have gone across there on dog sleds. And you just didn't have to have a very big group of people to come over and start all the entire population. And we know there were 5 immigrations, at least DNA tells us that story. The Alaskan natives, Nadim, who are also in Western Canada bordering Alaska, are genetically different than the standard Native Americans. The Inuit, also known as Eskimos, DNA has proven they're related to the Mongolians. Aleuts, genetics has proven they're related to the Japanese. And then on Easter Island, the people of Easter Island, their DNA shows they're half Polynesian and half Southern Native American. And again, also in Peru, you find that same mixture. So it was obviously the Europeans weren't first; the Europeans just colonized. But there's no doubt that the Almadad fits in the Almadad beyond what known. And that's why on my blog post, if I refer to the Native Americans as the Almadadi, that's really who they are from a biblical perspective. So now you've got this. Ideal of who these, if they're Joktan. Oh, another we're mentioning Joktan is Ophir. Ophir is who India came from. Solomon traded with Ophir for apes, ivory, and peacocks. And the only other place there's peacocks is way down in the jungle of Africa. There's a peacock without the is much less colorful, and they're really where they trade going on back in. But the people of India going across the Arabian Sea and then across the Red Sea, on ships have been trading with Egypt, well, since the time of the Egyptians. So, so this is Ophir. And Yaved, the Chinese own records say that they're descendants of Javed. Yobab. Yaved is really the right way to say it. Where I grew up, I said Jobab or something. But anyways, so you get this ideal. So who are we talking about here particularly? We're talking about everyone again in maybe a southeastern third or so of Asia, or perhaps a little bit more. All of North America, all of South America, and all the natives in Australia and Oceania, the Polynesians, etc. And Johnson noticed that 13 children starts 13 ethnic groups. He's the most proficient, by a long way at the spread is populating beyond counting again, because there's just so many. So now we know where everyone came from, and we know how that they knew God. How their fathers had heard from God, but how quickly they turned aside and went back to the same conditions they did before the flood. This new beginning really didn't change a lot for them in so many ways, because the root of the man's problem was his heart was still at an evil inclination. That didn't change. Well, remember though, remember we said God said before the flood, I'm going to cut the lifespan down to 120 years, 1/8 of what it had been. Kind of the maximum where it was around 1/8. And we're going to look at this. We're going to look and see how this plays out by looking at at a line through Shem, where we're given the actual, year, how old everyone was, except like we looked at before. And we're going to begin there in Genesis 11, verse 10 through 17. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and he began Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years, and he begat sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 30 and 5 years and begat Selah. And Arphaxad, after he begat Selah, 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Selah lived 30 years and he begat Eber. And Selah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. Eber begat 430 years, lived 430 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. Okay, well, there's several things worth noting. Now, first of all, let's start off with notice Arphaxad is 2 years after the flood. Now, so Noah's life, that's year 602. He went in the ark on year 600. Okay. So, and Shem's 100 years at that point, meaning he was born not when Noah was 500 years old, but 502. 602 minus 100. So as we said, they're not, these three sons, all their name, the oldest one's Japheth. He was born when Noah's 500. Shem was born a couple years later, and Ham was born sometime after that. Now, notice how Shem lives 500. He lives a total of 600 years. Okay. So now we went from the shortest anyone lived besides Abel was killed, who died of natural causes, we saw before, was 777 years. So this whittling down has begun. And notice something else worth noteworthy. Notice before Shem's 100 years old when he has his kid, but notice everyone else is now in their 30s, more in line with today. So we got this one guy going 600 years, and then you have 3 generations after him. People are living into their 400s. Okay, and there's kind of this whittling down process going. That's going on, and it brings us down to Peleg. Remember, Eber begets Peleg. So now we're going to look at. Now we're starting to talk about the descendants of Peleg. We talked about his brother Joktan extensively a moment ago. And notice how long Peleg We'll get to how long Peleg lives, okay, in a moment here. And here in Genesis 11, verse 18 through 25, read the following. And Peleg begat 30 years, and begat Reuel. And Peleg lived and begat Reuel 209 years and begat sons and daughters. Reuel lived 232 years and begat Serug. 230 years, I'm sorry, and begat Serug. And Reuel lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters. Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. Nahor lived 9 and 20 years and begat Terah. And Nahor lived and begat Terah 119 years and begat sons and daughters. Okay, so when you see this, this whittling down here, and I mean, notice Nahor's almost at 120 here. He's at 148. He's at 100. He's dying at 100. He's dying at 148. We're not too far away from that 120 mark. Which comes about in the days of Noah. But people now have gone down from living in the 200 range lifespan to the 400 range lifespan to the 100 or 200 year lifespan for 3 generations. Again, it's like the 400 down to the 100 plus in the 100 range lifespan, cut down considerably from 900 being kind of normal. Okay, so we're kind of we're down there. We're down. We've gotten down there, but also worth noting is notice how long Peleg lives, and Peleg's when Terah comes from that, and that's the father of Abraham, who we'll talk about some more about this when we talk about Abraham. We pick up later in another series about the patriarchs. But I just want you to notice this is Abraham's father. And this is why this line here is given last, because it's the most important one. Okay, the rest was general information to help us understand where everyone was, but now we're drilling down to the important people, as it were, the important person. Noah, there was Adam, then there was Adam, Abel, Shem, Enoch, Noah. Now the next important person is going to be Abraham. And again, we'll talk about him. And that's why we're giving this about Peleg. And the other thing about Peleg is, notice he lived 239 years. That again, that division of the earth started. There's fire names of this because the earth starts dividing. Okay, it divided in his days, this 239 year period. And again, the largest, if you take from the largest piece of connected land that we know of, across on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean, it only had to move like 10 inches a day. Or I may remember, I calculated this for it may have been 10 centimeters, but I think it was 10 inches a day at the most. And most of, so we're talking about, while it was literally earth shattering in the sense the land was shattered, it didn't shatter the planet. Okay. And the people who, were on that piece of land, if you're not by the coast, you wouldn't even know what was going on. If you're not somewhere where you could see the division occurring. So now we're going to summarize up, kind of what we've learned, lessons for us to learn about the descendants of Noah. We've learned who they are. We all came from them. Got a good idea of all our, the ethnic groups. This is the 70 root nations of the Gentiles, the Goy, and kind of how things got to the way they were. And it's kind of summarized up for us here in Romans 1, verses 28 through 32. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, and whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedience to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, knowing the judgment of God, which they commit such things are worthy of death. Now I do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Okay, remember Noah's sons. I forgot to mention this. Let's go look back at the age of Shem, 600 years. Put this in perspective. Noah, no, no, Noah died when Abraham was around. I can't remember. I want to say it's 52 years old, 52 or 58 years old. Okay, around that. And Abraham was in his 50s. Okay, when Noah died. Shem actually, I mean not Noah. I'm sorry, Abraham. No, when Noah died, I said it right. Shem actually outlived Abraham. Okay, and we can assume that Ham and Japheth had similar lifestyle times. So they've seen the wickedness before the flood, the destruction that came. They have the faith to get on build the boat and get on the ark, the box, and get in it. They have been saved from it. They heard the voice of God twice. We saw, the covenant and the commandment, but they had that evil inclination about them, and they did not want to retain God their knowledge. So when just like with Cain, when Nimrod comes along with, "Hey, I'll get you off the God standard," they went along with it. And the reprobate means you can't tell left from right from wrong, or left from right. So it's kind of a Hebrew idiom, but you can't tell right from wrong. Okay, why? Because they don't want to retain God their knowledge. And remember, these men we're talking about, and I'm sure they told their children, except they knew that God had destroyed people before them for doing such. They knew these things were worthy of death. But they had that evil inclination, and they wanted to scratch that itch, as it were. So they were all too ready to get off the God standard and worship the sun, the moons, and the stars, or whatever. And the world ends up in just about as big a mess by the time of Abraham, certainly, as it was in the days of Noah before the flood. And the important takeaways from us about this is people will go, well, people's sons have cancer or something, and they realize they're dying, and they're like, God, if I just had more time, I'd do what's right. No, they wouldn't. God gave those people before the flood 900 years. These people had 600 years still wouldn't do what's right. 400 years wouldn't do what's right. 200 years wouldn't do what's right. Down in the hundreds, not doing what's right. You know, uh, you know. And another thing is, well, if we just got rid of all the bad people and started over, then we wouldn't have these problems. Nope. Been there, done that, didn't work. This is part of God's thing here, showing man that these ideals don't work. All right, we'll give your ideal, we'll give it a try. We'll see how, God knows already, but we'll let you see how it turns out. Then turn out. The heart is the problem. We're all born with a wicked heart. Sometimes people are like, oh, I know God knows my heart. Yes, he does. He says in Jeremiah, it's wicked above all things and exceedingly deceitful. That's what he says about your heart. Our hearts without God are wicked. And we really only have two choices. One, we submit to God and walk in his ways, and he gives us a new heart, and we can do what's right in his eyes. Other one is we don't want to retain God in our knowledge. And we don't, we're going to end up doing these things that are listed here that we just talked about. We're going to end up doing wickedly. There's no in between. And sometimes people got this ideal. Sometimes people in America have given their children this ideal that, like in the prodigal son, when the son comes home, he's got to live under the father's rules. But some people have trained their parents and they've, misrepresented God in that regard, where there's no tough love. Their son, their daughter gets in trouble, they bail them out. and don't require, they bail them out, but that maybe they'll move back in their house, but don't make them live by the rules of what's right. And they get the idea they can do this with God, and you cannot do it. Either you surrender to God completely, keep Him in your knowledge, or you're going to end up you're going to end up with a wicked, or you can get a new heart, or you're going to keep the wicked heart you were born with. And you're going to end up doing wicked things like these listed. There is no in between. And that's perhaps the biggest lesson we can learn from what we read today. That's it for this week. Until next week, shalom.